Hello, everybody. Justin Halverson here. Got another great episode for you today. I sat down with Emily Koochel, who is a professor here at Michigan State teaching personal finance. Emily has her bachelor's and master's in personal financial planning from Kansas State and Texas Tech. She also has a master's in human development and family science and her Ph.D. in applied family science from K-State University. It was a great conversation today. We spoke more about the behavioral side of personal finance and financial planning, as well as Emily's work about financial transparency and relationships. So, great episode. Hope you guys enjoy the show. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the msuwma podcast. I am here with Emily Koochel. Emily, thank you for being here today.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Very excited to have you. So to start off a little bit, do you mind telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and your path kind of into the personal finance space?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now I am currently an assistant professor over in social sciences at MSU teaching the personal finance course, just kind of an introductory broad course for a lot of our students. Large course sections, which is great. I get to see a lot of people from different disciplines. But what has kind of ultimately led me here started a long time ago, in my opinion, with my undergraduate work starting in personal financial planning at a previous university, and then working on a master's in financial planning, which really advanced my knowledge and kind of led me into working at a small wealth management firm down in Dallas. So I had the opportunity to finally apply that knowledge and see clients, which was really interesting. But conversations from meeting with clients is what ultimately led me back to wanting to do some research about the financial behaviors that I was seeing with the clients themselves. So quick example, primarily worked with retirement clients. And there was one particular client who came in and he was telling us that he did not want to involve his wife in his retirement planning. Very interesting for this particular couple, because this wasn't somebody who was newly married, remarried. This was like a 30 plus year marriage. And oftentimes when we think of retirement, we think of joining up and turning off the income together, and we're going to live kind of this joint life in a lot of ways. And he said, if she does not succeed in retirement, that's not my problem. That was super interesting to me. We don't often hear that. And I emailed one of my previous professors and said, hey, these behaviors behind financial management and the financial decisions are really intriguing to me. And she suggested, why don't you do some research about it then? So it brought me back to another round of graduate school, but it looks a little bit differently this time. I went into family studies and ultimately family science for my PhD. And the reason for that is because if we want to understand some of those behaviors, we really need to dive into the greater family unit. We need to look at the person, the individual. So I felt like I had the technical side with the financial planning degrees, but I didn't have the tools to assess the person and their environment. So it led me to the social sciences, which is now where I'm housed, and I get to kind of marry these two passions, which is great.
That's awesome. That's so great to hear. I know I've heard that phrase. It's like personal finance is a lot more personal than it is finance. I've definitely heard that before. So yeah, it's great to hear. Can you tell us a little bit about like your PhD in applied family science? So us over here, we're business students. We know we're in like all of the strategy world. I don't think we get as much of that. So can you maybe tell us the differences between like the PhD level and the master's level in the financial planning space?
Yeah. So really, I think of the master's of advanced kind of technical work in your degree. So if you really enjoyed your undergrad and you want to get into the more advanced, so like for my personal degree, it was the more advanced investing options and more exotic strategies, kind of that sexy part of the personal financial planning that we may shy away from at the undergraduate level, just because we're trying to really establish good fundamentals. The master's degree allows you to advance that knowledge, which is great. If you're looking towards the PhD, we often see the PhD as a research degree. So the primary difference is, yes, you have those fundamentals, the technical side of things, but now we're wanting to understand that. So we're going to layer in some theory, definitely some statistical analysis and methodologies there. And that's the piece that we see the PhD kind of layer on top of that fundamental knowledge. Different versions and kind of pass along with the PhD. That can mean going into academia and of course teaching. But we also see a lot of practitioners use a PhD or even come back for a PhD just so they can continue to build up that research muscle for themselves.
That's very interesting. Yeah, fascinating. I know we're all about the fundamentals over here, getting all the basics. So it's really, really interesting. So do you mind telling us a little bit then about the work you're doing in your personal finance class over at the social science class, in the social science college over here at Michigan State? Do you mind telling us about that?
Yeah. So within the classroom or kind of personal side of things, like research oriented?
Why not both? So how about how did you get started here at Michigan State? That's a better way to ask the question. Like, did you come in here on the research level or did you come in to teach the class?
Perfect. Yeah. So, so I was hired as a teaching professor, and I actually just came in January 2020. So I'm a brand new Spartan, and
Welcome.
shortly before. Thank you. Yeah, I love it. Shortly before, of course, the pandemic and all the excitement of 2020, but I was able to get into the classroom and really experience FSU, which was great. The way that I was brought on is something that has been building for a few years. And I'm really privileged to come on the heels of some of the pioneers here at MSU for their work in building the personal finance course, which is with Dr. Erica Toby and Dr. Amanda Gannott-Talbot. They had built a lot of work actually out of their master's programs and being personally interested in personal finance, building the course from having just one section to now having two sections where we see well over 1,500 students in our courses throughout the fall, spring, and summer semesters. And we continued to build momentum off of their work with Go for the Green, and we do kind of money management weeks and a lot of promotional events for a lot of our students to continue to push that knowledge out for those who can't get into our courses. We're actually lucky enough to typically have a wait list for our courses, which is great because it's the acknowledgement of personal finance is really important. I think it's one of those areas that as an adult, you're kind of expected to know. You're expected to understand a credit card, but nobody really told you about it. You're expected to be able to tell the difference between health insurances and retirement packages once you graduate with this great degree from MSU, but a lot of our students don't really know how to navigate that space. So I think personal finance is kind of one of those fundamental courses. And students have recognized that. We're lucky to have a university who also recognizes the benefits of the course. So here at MSU, that's kind of been the buildup, and we're continuing to grow that. I think we're going to have some exciting announcements coming out of our space in future years. As far as my own work, I typically kind of bring in that married practitioner piece of looking at personal finance as well as the behaviors, and I specialize in looking at financial transparency, which is defined as like the open and honest disclosure of finances. So looking at individuals and really kind of keying in on the deception piece, or why people keep financial secrets or don't tell their partners about purchases. And, we kind of see this in the media. We see somebody kind of snickering like, oh, I'm not going to tell my husband about these credit card bills, or I'm going to hide the sacks from shopping. And we see that brought in a lot in our media, which I think is great for pushing to go out and go shopping and for a marketing tactic, but unfortunately, pretty unhealthy behaviors inside of relationships. And so that's where I tend to focus my work.
That's so interesting. And finance and relationships, typically you don't hear those two in the same sentence, right? It's not something I think that comes to mind. You touched on something real quick. I do want to ask you about your work, but
Yeah.
personal finance, it's kind of, I want to ask you this like, bluntly. So we're in a financial advisor program. I'm going to go off and work as, for an RIA firm as an advisor, advising clients. But, is personal finance for everybody? People who aren't going to go my route, should they still be aware of personal finance? What do you think about that?
I have probably a very biased answer, but an immediate yes. The reason for that, again, because finances are something that impacts people, I would argue, on a daily basis. We make a decision whether or not to purchase something, to turn on a light or not turn off a light, which is going to generate a bill coming in that's going to be future due. So we are touching on finances every single day. You see things pushed towards you on social media constantly, and you're always making a decision whether or not to look at that, to buy that. So personal finance in general, yes, I think everybody should have it. One, just for financial management, but also for some of those bigger decisions. Do you understand some of the basics of, does a debit card help my credit score? A lot of the students that I meet with, I shouldn't say a lot, but I do have students that I meet with who don't quite have that understanding, and those are basic fundamentals. Again, there's kind of this expectation that we're supposed to know how to manage our financial lives, but we're not necessarily getting an explicit message for some about doing that. So when we're looking at this, we have a filtering agent of our family from the greater society. So you could have a family who's going to give you explicit messages saying, as you earn $1, here we go and set up a checking account. This is a bank, and this is what this looks like. And for other students and for other people in general, we're not getting that explicit socialization about finances. So somewhere along the way, we just kind of do this trial and error. And I am hopeful that I can get in front of people before making some of those mistakes, because everybody does, that we can help them to have greater financial well-being without having to trip up on not paying a credit card back on time, or not utilizing the match in their retirement. Some of these things that make us ultimately financially well off in the long run, but early on, if we don't know to do it, then it's hard to implement it.
That's very fair. That's such a great mission, because I know like the world is just becoming more increasingly complex, right? Like we all have to save for our own retirements now. There's no pension plans really, or at least they're not as common, and we're kind of left to fend for ourselves, unlike previous generations. Not the best way, but yeah, I think it is. So you mentioned your work about financial transparency. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about that. So why was that important, and what first drew you? I know you mentioned that story. Actually, let me ask it that way. Was that what first drew you to studying financial transparency? Was that experience down in Dallas?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was one of the big experiences that was pretty eye-opening. We also had clients who would call in and say that they wanted to move money around or to not tell a significant other about that. I think probably one of the, if I can switch kind of emotions for a second, was probably one of the more sadder experiences. Is we had a client who her husband had passed away unexpectedly. But in between that time, he was sick, and we thought it was just kind of an illness that you would bounce back from. And he became incapacitated. So with all of the money being in a retirement account, it's an individual account, she cannot get access to big money, and she didn't quite know where that spending money was, like across bank accounts. He had always taken care of it, but she needed to pay some bills and some loans, and the bulk of their money was sitting in his retirement account. So for those who don't know, in order to get access to that money without taking penalties and other things, the person actually needs to pass on, because you're a beneficiary. So you've been, that the money passes after death. So a lot of it was tied up. And having to go and, meet with somebody who needed to get these estate documents done very quickly, and they were stressed and there was this crisis, but she had been left out of all of those financial decisions Unfortunately, after his passing, we found additional loans that she didn't know about that she was now responsible for. And she came in with a shoebox of bills that she had never opened because he said he would get to them. And now she's faced with not only grieving her spouse, her significant other, but the burden of all these bills and kind of the chaos of, I don't know where to start or where the money is. That to me is another example of that transparency piece that, we can think that things are going really well and we talk about everything. But if somebody is keeping a secret, you're not being transparent. It's like going to a doctor and not telling them all of the symptoms. We can't properly diagnose you. So from a practitioner standpoint, we needed to find a way to be able to identify if people were being transparent in their relationships and the damage that could potentially be done to the relationship. And then how could we actually be proactive and get in front of some of those decisions to keep a secret or to intentionally lie to our significant other about financial transactions.
Wow. Very, very interesting. So why do you think people aren't financially transparent? I know like our generation, my generation, we seem to be open about everything, but why do you think people choose to not be transparent with their spouses about finances?
So a lot of it tends to come from your socialization as well as your values. So if you grew up in a family that said, we don't talk about money, we don't ask about how much somebody makes, that is very personal. In fact, it's rude to ask somebody about money. A lot of those values were pushed forward. You bring up a really interesting point though. The later generation, so millennials onward, have actually become more transparent in their conversations with their peers about finances. And what we've actually found is this is really great for negotiating because often we're like, ooh, they make money, they got a job, but we don't ask how much they're making. Millennials and onward are like, hey, what are you making? Because I'm going for the same job and I want to see if I can get around the same range or more than that. And so there was some research somewhat recently that said, employers really kind of need to be on their toes because millennials are not afraid to talk about money. And they're being far more open than previous generations. So hopefully that will also continue to translate into relationships. But as you know, negotiating for a job and talking about money in that way, far different than talking to your significant other about spending habits at home in the privacy of your own relationship.
Yeah, it is. It's funny you say that too. So Broad, they have a career tracker. I don't know if you guys have that at the social science college, but like I filled that out. And basically they ask all of us who have an offer, an internship, to fill out all that information about the job, the salary, where it is, so we can compare different majors and different jobs and where we're going. And I know that was the first thing I did when I got an offer was I looked right there and was like, all right, what are my peers making? And how can I, what can I do? Can I leverage that in some way?
Yeah. Also a great negotiation tactic. Bravo to you and to them for having that in place and for letting you guys know to utilize that. Often universities are gathering information, kind of post-graduation of where people landed in their salaries. So being proactive and having access to that early on so you can negotiate, that's fantastic. I applaud that.
Yeah. So anybody listening who hasn't filled it out yet, fill it out because it's very, very useful. I know the Career Center is very big on making sure all of us seniors fill that out. So
that's great.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about your work, like the financial transparency scale. So do you mind telling us a little bit about that? What is that? What is the financial transparency scale?
Yeah. So this was something that I had the opportunity to develop within my master's work, worked with some pioneers in financial therapy, which is another sector of personal finance where we actually bring in mental health and finances. So worked with her and basically we identified that there was a lot of previous research about having good communication and good financial management techniques. And all of that was kind of linked or suggested to say that, people are having good marriages, that they're lasting longer, we're seeing reduced conflict, reduced stress. But there was kind of this notion that if people are sitting down and putting a budget together, then they're doing well in their relationship. The problem with that is I could sit down and do a budget, but still continue to lie or keep a secret. And that's not going to be in there, right? Because I'm intentionally making that decision. So there is some previous kind of big surveys out there. One of them being Forbes put out a survey a few years ago and found that 82% of people said that they hid a purchase from their significant other, and 40% actually admitted to intentionally lying about that purchase or keeping their spending habits a secret. So we knew that this was happening, but we didn't have a way to measure it. So a financial practitioner, financial therapist, whoever was meeting with a client, we didn't have a way to see that early on. So like in your intake forms, often you're telling them your income and your assets and these other things. And we're kind of just assuming that you're telling us everything that you should, but oftentimes you're also sitting there with your significant other and you could be keeping these other secrets. So we need a way to get that information, one, just for holistic financial planning and to make sure that that's going to work out well. And another way to just kind of give them a safe space to let us know. And then from a practitioner standpoint, you would want to align them appropriately. So if you're a financial planner, this is probably outside of your reach, and you would send them to a financial counselor or financial therapist to kind of work on that relationship piece and why they're keeping secrets. But the scale was built to be able to identify those behaviors. We didn't have a way to assess them, but we knew that they were happening.
It's very interesting. So is that something you guys like are doing in-house? I guess I'm just I want to understand how that works exactly. So how do you assess where somebody falls on that scale when a couple comes in, and like, is it a 1 through 10, or how does that work exactly?
Yeah, so there are kind of 3 subscales within the financial transparency scale. It's a 26 item scale. The first being more of your financial management techniques. So do you guys look at your credit report? Do you guys look at bills or talk about goals together? Those kind of technical pieces that we often see that are related to kind of healthy financial relationships. The second and third piece is really looking at trust and disclosure and financial judgment. So what is the likelihood that you would keep a secret from your spouse or not tell them about a bonus, those type of things. The other one really driving home the trust aspect. So do you trust your partner's financial management and their financial judgment? And what this is trying to get at is if you go away for the weekend, or if your partner is out shopping, do you trust that they're going to have good financial management and good judgment when you're not there? So that's kind of when this happens. Do you trust your partner when they're away from you? A lot of that comes with having these coordinated boundaries of like, hey, this is how we view our money and how we treat our money. But that can look very different for individuals. So this scale tries to get at the very kind of fundamental pieces, budgeting, but diving into the personal side of, would you lie to your significant other, and do you trust them? The one thing to point out is what I found in counseling couples is lying or omission of information is good and bad for a couple of reasons. But one of them being, I met with a couple and he admitted to keeping a kind of side pot of money. He had done some contracting work and he kept it from his family. And so he admitted this to his wife in our counseling session. And she was, of course, upset about it. She felt as though that was not being transparent. She felt a bit violated. She thought that they were kind of on the same page about things. And she was a very, very diligent record keeper. So this really, was a bit of a trigger. But what he said was, I'm not doing it to be hurtful. I'm doing it because when I use this money, I don't feel bad about it. So they had cited an argument that she was telling him like, hey, you need to go buy a new lawnmower. It's not working. And they had gone around and around. And he wouldn't just go to Home Depot and get the lawnmower. So he ends up using this side money to go get it because he felt like that wasn't going to impact his children and his wife and their financial stability because she was so kind of rigid about the numbers. He didn't feel good. He felt like that was taken away from him. So if he had side contracting money that he saw as just his, he was still willing to be helpful to the family, but he didn't feel like he was having, kind of this takeaway from them. So it was interesting. They ended up just kind of finding another way for him to continue to have money that he saw as his own, and was a little more free to spend. So he wasn't lying to be malicious. He was just lying because he kind of felt bad. So kind of we have to dive into the layers once we do see that somebody identifies with keeping a secret or not telling somebody about a purchase. We have to be very kind of cautious of not jumping in and saying, oh my gosh, you're bad and you're doing things wrong and you're trying to be hurtful, that there's probably something else lying there.
That's so fascinating. That kind of brings up another question I was going to ask. I was like, what do you do when you identify where somebody lies on the scale? Like, is there a set blueprint for where somebody falls, or is it, like you were saying, totally just dependent on the individual situation?
So I think it would depend on the severity of the identification. For some, it's just more of, I didn't know that you wanted me to tell you about that. I thought we were okay. For some couples, they will actually set a spending limit. So I had a friend actually who had a spending limit, let's say of like $100. And if you spend over $100, then I have to tell my partner about it. But what she was doing was making a whole bunch of really small purchases that never hit the $100 mark, but that Amazon like click and just going over and over. So she was spending a lot of money, but not really ever having to tell her husband about it because they weren't hitting the mark. So that's the agreed upon amount. And we often see couples set those amounts. So they had to kind of recalibrate when they decided to do that. He felt as though she wasn't telling him, but they had this agreement. So I think the severity matters. If somebody's doing it intentionally and if there's some type of malice behind it, I think that's an exceptional experience that really needs to be addressed. But oftentimes we'll combine one scale with, hey, looks like you're having trouble here. Let's use another scale or another way to diagnose and see if we have any, we call money behavioral issues, and we can kind of continue to pinpoint those.
Okay. This is so fascinating. I could talk about this all day. I have one more question on the financial transparency scale. So, you were talking about practice. I guess that's my last question. So where do you see this being used? Do you see this being used in, big wealth management firms, or do you see it smaller, like you said, financial counselors? Where do you see this like gaining traction?
Yeah. So I see it with financial practitioners who are probably settling more into the roles of financial therapy and financial counseling specifically, because those are going to be our practitioners who really dive into that emotional side of money. I also think it would be advantageous for your financial planners. So that way, when they are having, or when they do identify these behaviors with their clients, they're not necessarily the ones equipped to do it, but they can make that referral. So similar to somebody needing tax planning or estate planning, and it's outside of your scope, then I can refer that on and we can coordinate practitioners. Within kind of the bigger wealth management firms, I think you would see this more within your financial wellness programs that some corporations have for their employees, where they're helping to generate greater financial well-being for overall employees. So if you have an employee who is struggling at home and their relationships, you could have an on-site counselor or practitioner there to help manage that. So we often see like medical doctors and mental health professionals and things like that at our larger corporations to help with that overall well-being of employees. I think that's where you would see it situated if it was going to kind of your larger, more traditional corporations like you were talking about.
Okay. Do you think more people are kind of focusing on financial well-being? Do you think that's going to become more popular in the future?
I think financial well-being is quite a buzzword these days. I was doing some research earlier this week on it, and you see a lot of large companies really pushing financial well-being. You see a lot of startups who are also promoting financial well-being, which I think is great. It's this really wonderful umbrella term of, we want you to be at your best financially. And so here are all these kind of little subsections that we can help you with, these startups and other companies, to make sure that you're in overall good financial health, the same way that you would with your body, is to make sure that we're having these check-ins and promoting, kind of this healthiness to your financial life.
Awesome. Emily, this has been so great talking to you. So I have two more questions for you. I guess the first one I want to ask is, do you have any advice for college students who are looking to learn more about going, like maybe getting a master's or a Ph.D. and learning more about the behavioral side of financial planning? What should they be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think utilize your networks, first of all. So if you know somebody who's in that space, reach out to them. People love to talk about things that they're passionate about. I mean, I've been going on for a few minutes here and it can feel like a blink of an eye, right? So if you're really passionate about something, people want to talk about it. So reach out to them. The next space is, of course, to utilize your social networks. So if you're on LinkedIn and you see interesting people doing interesting things, reach out and say, hey, I think your work is incredible. Tell me more about it. They will naturally have those connections if that's, kind of their role. I think those are two really great spaces. If you're looking into the school side of things, like you're wanting to go into grad school, I would start looking at some of the big schools that are out there that are doing it. We have a few that rise to the top pretty quickly. And your financial planning schools often are actually often housed inside of your human sciences. So my two previous degrees, both of those being specifically in personal financial planning, are housed inside of human sciences and human ecology colleges.
Awesome. Thank you. And last one for you here. So I would just want to open up the floor to you. Like, is there anything maybe we didn't cover today, or anything you would like to say to anybody who's interested in learning more about behavioral finance?
Yeah. Well, this has been fantastic. I appreciate your thoughtful questions. This has been really fun for me too. So thank you for the invite. I would offer myself as a connection for anybody who would like to speak more about this. I would love to hear from you, and I am more than happy to, of course, utilize my network if it's helpful for anybody and kind of point you in the right direction. I would love to do that. The other thing that I would just tell to any students, whatever your passion is, if it's in finance, if it's in personal finance, get linked in with those organizations and those networks early on. They are great. I have professionals that I've been in touch with for years, and they've been able to continue to help me grow in my own profession and, of course, personally. So reach out to them, utilize the networks like LinkedIn and the events that are put on by the college. I think all of those are really fantastic ways to really start to dive in and dip your toe in, and honestly just meet some really, really cool people.
Awesome. Yeah, those are such wise words. I reached out to ask you if you wanted to come. You said yes right away. So there's a point right there. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Emily, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much. I do appreciate the invite. And again, I really appreciate you having well thought out questions in this conversation today. It's been really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It was my pleasure.
If you liked what you just heard, please like, comment, and share. This is Vincent Pacillo, producer of the MSUWMA podcast. MSUWMA, or Michigan State University Wealth Management Association, is a student organization part of the Eli Broad College of Business, located in East Lansing, Michigan. Our mission is to inspire and educate the next generation of financial planners. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, please check out our channel on all platforms such as Spotify and Apple Podcast. And check out our social media at MSUWMA and MSUWMA.com.